In the first 5 videos of this series, I have presented 3 equally important arguments for the existence of God. I have not made a case for any God in particular, just that a transcendent being does exist. To do this, I have presented the Kalam cosmological argument, the teleological or design argument, and the moral argument. Each of these arguments are mutually exclusive. Each argument, exclusive of the others, has been more than sufficient to bring people to the intellectual decision that there is a rational, reasonable, and logical basis for a belief in God. And, taken together as a whole, these arguments combined are very convincing indeed. When I was in the process of rebuilding my belief system, I was a young attorney in my early 30s. I had 3 little kids at the time and felt the heavy weight of responsibility for their eternal souls, if they had them. It's easy to believe whatever you want when you're only responsible for your own life. You can be cavalier and not too concerned about such things when you're young and feel like you'll live forever. But when you have kids, it changes things. At least it did for me. I simply had to get this figured out. If there was a heaven and a hell, and I got it wrong, that would mean that I would be getting it wrong for my kids as well. That weighed heavily on my heart and my mind. So, I took a deep dive in science and philosophy. This process that I've explained to you in just a handful of videos took a couple of years of devotion to figure out. At that time, YouTube was mostly cat videos. It was not helpful at all. And so I had to turn to books. The other side of these arguments is naturalism, or neo-Darwinist evolution. And for the many reasons I've previously explained in the preceding videos, it simply became an unattractive alternative. It felt like an empty suit. It cannot in any way account for or explain the origin of life. The tenets of naturalism teach that life has no meaning. We have no free agency, and that the theory itself is mostly right. That mostly right part is like blisters on your feet. It makes it harder to walk the path. It's not a law, it's still a theory with holes in it. Now, that is not to say that some form of evolution does not occur, and I have not said that in any of my videos. Some form of evolution does occur, but the kind of evolution that does occur is the kind that allows existing species to adapt to new environments. But that function alone is light years away from explaining the origin of life on the planet. And, candidly, the cult-like devotion to science as a religion I found to be a little creepy. Science is a methodology for discovery. It should not include a cult-like belief in any discovery or theory. The alternative was God, if he existed. So, with those 2 possibilities, I studied. As I mentioned above, at this time in my life, I was an attorney and I was steeped in legal concepts and theories, and I decided that the standard of evidence that I would allow for would be the preponderance of the evidence, which is a civil standard, and it basically means that a party must prove that it is more likely than not that their version of the facts is true. So this is what I did, and in all honesty, all I can do is share with you that mathematics and statistical probabilities were the tools that I leaned on the most to determine if I thought there was a reasonable, rational, and logical basis for the existence of God. And if so, which of the so-called Holy Scriptures would be the best fit for a belief system? Now, that's not a part of this video, but I still relied on mathematics and statistical probabilities throughout. And the reason for that is simple. I wasn't going to let this be an emotional decision, because emotional decisions can be unmade in other moments of emotions. Remember, logical, reasonable, and rational thought, that's what wins the day. I also felt that each of these opposing arguments, the cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments, were equally compelling on their own merit, and that taken as a combined whole, had some kind of compounding effect on my rational ability to believe that God existed. So I developed a simple formula, an averaging formula, to help me better quantify my belief, coupled by a compounding modifier for the number of arguments that I ended up believing. Now that sounds like a lot, and so I'm going to give you fair warning. There's some math ahead on this journey. At least that's how I approached it. And I will say that some people don't think that a decision for God should come down to mathematical models of averaging or compounding, and that's fine for them. Everyone's different, and this is, after all, the story of my journey. So, how did I calculate all this? How did I apply math to this? Because when people ask me, how did you come to have such a firm belief in God? I can honestly actually say it came down to the math. So, how did I calculate that? Well, it sounds complicated, but it's a really simple scoring system. I started with a simple averaging approach to give each argument a weight between 0 and 10, and to see what that combined score would average to be. For me, this was an intellectually honest way to approach this God project, because I did not initially weigh each argument with the same value. For example, on a scale of 0 to 10, how convinced are you by the Kalam cosmological argument for the existence of God? On a scale of 0 to 10, how convinced are you by way of the teleological or design argument for the existence of God? On a scale of 0 to 10, how persuasive is the moral argument to you for the existence of God? Okay, these are the questions I asked myself. Now, however, I complicated it even further because I didn't allow for the assignment of an absolute 0 or an absolute 10, simply because I don't think there's any possible way to be absolutely certain that there is a God. At the same time, I don't believe it's any possible way you can be absolutely certain there is not a God, because each one of those certainties are actually truth claims. And these are truth claims that you, I, or anyone else would fail to prove. So, the scale I built was from 1 to 9. And so here are the possible interpretations or explanations for the different resulting brackets that I assigned to how well I thought I was persuaded by each one of the arguments. If it scored a 1 to 2, that gave it a low belief or agreement. And this score suggests that you're not very convinced by the argument or did not find it persuasive. Maybe you need more evidence or a different approach to be persuaded further. If it scores a 3 to 5, you have a moderate belief or agreement, and that scoring bracket suggests that you find the argument somewhat persuasive. And you may have some reservations or questions about the argument that need to be addressed. Now, if you score between a 6 and 7, that's a high belief or agreement in that argument. And that scoring bracket suggests that you find the argument persuasive. You may need some additional information or evidence to be fully persuaded, but you certainly feel that you have found the arguments to weigh in high enough to meet the preponderance of the evidence standard. You find this more likely than not to be correct. If you score an 8 or a 9, that's a very high belief or agreement in the argument. This score suggests that you find the argument very persuasive and may be close to being fully convinced. You don't need any additional information or evidence to be fully persuaded. And for me, it was the Kalam cosmological argument that made the most sense, then the teleological, and then the moral argument. Now for you it might be different. Everyone feels a little differently about each one of the arguments, but that's where I landed. From there, I rated the strength of each argument, as I said above, on a scale of 1 to 9. The formula is really easy. I have a combined score that equals the Kalam cosmological score, the teleological score, plus the moral score divided by 3. That allows me to average the scores. So how I came in when I was finally done with all of my research and discovery was I rated the Kalam cosmological argument at a 9, the teleological argument at an 8, and the moral argument at a 7. The combined score was 9 plus 8 plus 7 divided by 3 is 8. So from a scale of 1 to 9, I came in as an 8. That was a huge preponderance leaning towards the logical, rational, and reasonable basis for belief in God. I scored very high. Now, as you can see in this scoring system, A lower score can bring the overall total lower in the averaging process. So, like I said, I felt that it was appropriate to include a compounding multiplier to account for the fact that when you stack mutually exclusive arguments together, you have a naturally occurring compounding effect. This is going to start to sound a little complicated, but it really isn't. Again, this is my method. If you don't like it, figure out your own. So what I did is I assigned a compounding element to the overall equation. If any argument weighed 6 or higher, it meant that I thought it was more reasonable than not to believe that argument was true. So if 2 arguments rated a 6 or higher, I assigned a 1.1 multiplier that I factored into the equation. If all 3 arguments stacked up at 6 or higher, I assigned a compounding multiplier of 1.2. So in my case, all 3 arguments rated higher than 6, so I allowed for a compounding factor or a multiplier of 1.2. So the final formula ended up looking like this. My combined score equaled the Kalam cosmological score plus the teleological score plus the moral score divided by 3 multiplied by the compounding multiplier of 1.2. So my combined score was a 9 plus 8 plus 7 divided by 3 equaled 8 times 1.2 equaled an 8.8. So I ended up with a final score after weighing in a compounding multiplier of 8.8 out of 9. Wow. I truly believe that there's a reasonable, logical, and rational basis for the existence of God. Now then, I know some of you are sharp out there, and you caught that something might be a problem with this method. Now, I told you that I did not believe that a 0 or a 10 was possible on the level of certainty about any argument because that would create a truth claim that can't be proven. And I wanted to be sure that I didn't create a truth claim one way or the other. A truth claim that says for certain there is no God, or another truth claim for certain there is a God, because neither of those can be proven. So you might be asking, what if I gave all 3 arguments a 9 and then combined that with a multiplier of 1.2? The answer would be 10.8, which would be greater than 10. And you nailed it. It's possible to come in above a 10, but before you head over to my blog and tell me what a moron I am, think about it just a bit. The scoring system measures the overall persuasive value if 2 or more arguments come in higher than a 6, because I feel that there's a naturally compounding effect in the agreement of 2 or more of these mutually exclusive arguments. Again, this is my system, and this is how I got here. The compounding result does not imply a level of certainty for any given argument. This is simply the mathematical result of compounding a persuasive value that I assigned on my own. Again, if you take 3 mutually exclusive arguments and they're all convincing to you, I think the combined effect of that has a compounding effect. Some people come to God just on cosmological arguments, some just on the teleological argument, some just on the moral argument. But if all 3 of these is convincing to you, I think there's extra power in that on a persuasive level. Get it? Now, at the end of things, it's up to you to decide if these 3 arguments provide you with the intellectual basis for a belief that there's a rational, reasonable, and logical basis for a belief in God. Personally, I think there is, by a score of 8.8 out of 9, according to my method. This cemented in my mind that it was most certainly reasonable, rational, and logical to believe in the existence of God. From there, I just needed to figure out which God, religion, or belief system was the most logical, reasonable, and rational to believe in. Now, obviously, if you're watching this video and you've watched all my others, I hammer on those 3 points. It needs to be logical. It needs to be reasonable. It needs to be rational. Otherwise, it can be stripped from you. And I don't want that to happen. Okay? So, where do we go from here? Well, from here, we need to have a short conversation about the truth. Before we can start analyzing different religions or belief systems, we need to have a standard by which we will weigh and measure each one. And we must be intellectually honest enough to follow the evidence wherever it leads. So I look forward to seeing you in the next video where we talk about truth. Take some time and See if this math makes sense to you. See if the scoring system makes sense to you. Come up with your own scoring system. But some way or the other, weigh and measure the three arguments against naturalism and see where you come out. I wish you luck in that process. If you want to use my system, go ahead. If you want to create your own, go ahead. But be intellectually honest with yourself as you do so. I'll see you in the next video. Hey, thanks so much for watching this video. Please like this video and share with your friends, and also make sure you subscribe to our channel. To start this series at the beginning, click on the top right video. That's our introduction video. And to continue with this series, click on the bottom right video for our next video titled The Truth. Thanks so much.